Pros they're exceptionally functional. They're freaks of nature. They're not like you and me. They can ride at 350, 400 watts all day long. That goes a long way towards enabling them to sustain their torso angle. So the more power you put through the pedals, the less weight you have over the front of the bike. I think it's really, really important to not look at the pro ranks for inspiration of how to set your bike up. No matter how much you might think you are able to push 400 watts all day long, you can't, because you're not a pro. So, I've got an image here of the fantastic Peter Sagan, who's, he's one of the most charismatic riders around, isn't he? He's fantastic. I think the first thing that sort of struck me, and you're going to see that there's a bit of a trend to this video. Two things. Firstly, the saddle height, and secondly, how he's actually interacting with the saddle. Now, before we get into that stuff, it's worth looking into, or looking at, his overall position, the position of his body. His arms are soft, got nice shape to his back. He doesn't look like he's grossly overextending his legs. It all kind of looks pretty good, right? However, you've got to look at how he's actually interacting with his equipment. And one of the biggest problems that I see in professional cycling is this sort of amount of saddle sticking out the back of the rider, which typically tends to mean that the rider's just sat slap bang on the nose of the saddle. Now, sitting on the nose of the saddle is a very common compensation for excessive saddle height, because the nose of the saddle is closer to the cranks and the pedals than the tail of the saddle is. It's also a very common compensation for excessive reach. So really, when we're in bike fits in here, we're looking to base the saddle height and the reach on a rider's ability to sit at the back of the saddle, which is basically utilizing the widest, most supported part of the saddle. In this instance, and you'll see in a lot of other instances as well, as we kind of critique a few more riders tend to be basing their saddle height on them sitting on the nose of the saddle. Cue, genital issues, pelvic stability issues, which can result in knee issues and foot issues. Just a bit of a rough idea, I would normally expect a rider certainly in this realm, in our bike fit studio, to extend their legs between 138 and 142 degrees with a flat foot through the bottom of the stroke. And we've loaded this image onto our video analysis software, and Peter here has got about 142 degrees. Look, there's no dot placement on this. This is relatively accurate. Again, this is to be taken with a pinch of salt. It's a little bit of fun. Peter's obviously at the upper end of that range, but we've got, I would say he's sat on, and that looks like a specialized Roman, so he's probably sat on at least 30, 40 more further forward of the widest part of the saddle, which to me suggests the reach is too long and the saddle's too high. Another disclaimer here is that with racers, particularly sprinters like Peter, he's going to need a lot more space in the front of the bike in order to sprint the thing. So again, this is another reason why consumers shouldn't be seeking inspiration from professional positions for their own positions, because you racing for those stop signs, it's not really the same as racing, as sprinting at the Champs-Elysees. I think you need to take that into consideration as well, because this is a position specifically for racing. It's gravitating onto the nose of the saddle. In my opinion, it would appear as a result of the reach being too long and the saddle height being too high. This just hurts my eyes. Look, the guy's amazing. He's an incredible bike rider. He's won the Tour de France. I'm amazed he's able to do it sitting on a saddle like this. So something that's very interesting about the success of the Physique Arione, which was designed by, I think it was Gilberto Simoni on a serviette. There's very little science involved in the design of the Physique Arione, but part of the key to the success of the Arione, let's get one out, shall we? It's a very long saddle. It's got a reasonably wide nose. It's got a very long nose as well, which enables you to sit in a vast array of positions with a reasonable degree of comfort. Now, I don't believe that is an effective means of riding a bicycle. Realistically, that's a bit like an engine moving around inside an engine bay, so it's not going to be very efficient, because if you sit further forward on the saddle, you lessen your leg extension. If you sit further back on the saddle, you increase your leg extension. Furthermore, the further forward you sit on the saddle, the closer to the handlebars you are. The further back on the saddle, the further away from the handlebars you are. As I said earlier when we were talking about Peter Sagan, you kind of want to be basing the reach and the saddle height on your ability to sit at the back of the saddle, the widest, most supportive part of the saddle. When saddles are being designed, that is where you're intended to sit on it. Therefore, why is all of that sticking out the back. I would say this is another prime example of the reach and the saddle height being excessive. And we're starting to see, as we progress through this video, you will see a bit of a trend here. Again, going back to the sprinting thing and the fact that these are pros, there is a good argument for having a longer reach, but not at the expense of rider functionality, in my opinion. I would use this as an example of how not to interact with the saddle. And again, it's not to take anything away from G, incredible rider, extremely talented individual, but the guy he's a professional cyclist. So I think he's able to, because of the rider's functionality, they're able to absorb the dysfunction on a much greater scale than perhaps a consumer can. This is an example of why just using photos. So just to be clear, the reason why we're using photos is that Francis and I spent way too much time looking through YouTube trying to find decent video of these people riding, and there just isn't any. So this is kind of why we're using photos. But just to kind of slightly call out the limitations of using stills in this video, we take the wonderful Marianne Vos. This is an image of her from Paris-Roubaix this year by the look of it, and in this instance the saddle height looks really extreme. However, look at this image, she's riding a different bike, but the saddle height looks totally different. The saddle looks a little bit on the high side, so again, kind of going back to my nominal values of 138 to 142 degrees with flat foot through the bottom of the stroke. Again, that doesn't mean to say people don't leave here outside of that range, because they absolutely do. People probably leave here with as much as 144 to 146 degrees, but that's in fairly unique circumstances. We're looking at 145 degrees with a reasonable degree of plantar flexion. I'd normally expect the plantar flexion angle to be between 8 and 12. That looks more, it's got 25 degrees of plantar flexion. So we could argue that she's having to point the toe in order to scrape through the bottom of the stroke. Having said all of that though, I would say that's not a bad position at all. It doesn't look excessively long, there's not a huge amount of saddle sticking out the back. I mean, frankly, it's a testament to Mariana, isn't it? She's an incredible rider. The thing is, this isn't about how an individual's extending their legs, it's about how they're interacting with the equipment, because the leg extension in this instance, in my opinion, is probably fine. It's really more to do with how they're going about achieving it, and is it, are they having to sit on the nose of the saddle in order to achieve it? Therein lies the problem. This is the issue. There's no real way of putting a measure on it, but I would say that the saddle height on this, we're looking at Nero Quintana, looks fine. It's just that he's sat too far. There we go. Perfect. Poor quality, but this is motion. I've got him more or less at the bottom of the stroke. It's relatively low res, so I don't have a huge amount of accuracy here, but referencing my range of 138 to 142, this is way out of that. He's underextending his legs. We could argue he's underextending his legs. However, if he sat further back into the saddle, he'd extend his legs more. Query is like, what's going on here? As far as I'm concerned, the reach is too long. There's nothing wrong with the saddle height, because if he sat further back, you probably find that his legs would be in that kind of nominal range. Like I said, this doesn't mean to say that everybody needs to fit into this range, but there's definitely a trend here for riders running positions that are way too long for them. Especially for someone like Nero Quintana, who he's not a sprinter, he's a climber. Again, we could argue that, does he need more space in the front for climbing? I mean, I don't think he does. The other thing to consider is Quintana's a relatively small rider. Can you even make a bike the right size for him? Similar to Quintana, this looks to be a similar situation. A lot of plantar flexion to the bottom of the stroke there, so you point the toes a lot. I would say that saddle's way too high. I tell you what, let's load it into Dartfish and see how it works. We're out of that extension figure range. There's like 30 degrees of plantar flexion, maybe a bit more, 40 degrees of plantar flexion. I mean, that's going to cause problems. And again, you can sort of see that there's a huge amount of saddle sticking out the back right there. There's a bit of a trend here, really, for excessive reaches and or excessive saddle heights, and this is sort of why I've got such a bee in my bonnet about it, because you see consumers copying this, and then cue genital issues, saddle sores, all of this kind of stuff. So I think all of this should be used as a reason why you shouldn't be looking towards a professional athlete's position for inspiration for your own. Do we want to say whose leg this is?
You're about to start some internet beef.
I don't want to start beef with anybody. I just disagree. I disagree with everything that he's saying. So this is Adam Hansen, and he's a very respected and respectable individual, ridden countless tours and whatnot. But I look at human beings on bicycles for a living. We've still got that trend of sitting too far forward on the saddle, and I think maybe we should kind of go back a step, because I think that saddle selection comes into this quite heavily as well. So, for example, something I've come to find is that excessive saddle width can result in a rider's gravitation to the nose of the saddle. Funnily enough, our best-selling saddle in the studio, and the way we sell saddles here is really through comparative testing. We stabilise the feet first, we get the position pretty good, and then we start changing, experimenting with saddles. Our best-selling saddle at the moment is the Italia SLR Boost S3. Funnily enough, this is one of the narrowest saddles on the market, and what I'm coming to find is that the reason we're getting such good results with this is because riders don't see any interference with the wings of the saddle, and that can be a primary driver for a gravitation to the nose. I disagree with this information. I disagree with that being an optimal saddle height. This still here has been stripped off of Adam Hansen's YouTube channel. And sorry Adam if you're watching, I don't mean any disrespect or any offence, I really don't, but the thing is with Adam is he's an incredibly capable, very seasoned professional athlete. He's in a lot more control of what he's doing than a consumer will be. When I say in control of what he's doing, in control of his body, and he's much more adept at riding a bicycle than a consumer, and many of you watching this video will be, because in order to be a professional athlete you have to do thousands and thousands of hours a year on the bike. Adam's known for his extreme positions. If any consumer tries to ride this sort of position, they're going to hurt themselves. End of story. There is no way a consumer is capable of tolerating this amount of leg extension with this amount of plantar flexion to the bottom of the stroke. It just flat out, that saddle's probably 4 centimeters too high. Again, sort of textbook compensation for an excessive reach is gravitating after the levers, as is the case in this image. We very often see riders where they have this inability to reach the brake levers, which is kind of where you control the bike, your gears and your brakes. And those levers, those hoods, are intended to hold your weight. It's not like back in the 80s where you had to ride down here the whole time. They're intended for you to they're intended to hold your weight, and it's where you operate the gears and the brakes from. So if you're sat back here, something's clearly wrong. Am I missing something here? We've only seen half a dozen, but as somebody who has a track record for making people more comfortable on bicycles, I'm blown away by. The thing is, we know from the athletes that we work with, we know that the rider care within teams is far from professional. It's all physiotherapy led, and at no point in a physiotherapy degree is a human interacting with a bicycle ever considered. So therefore, no jurisdiction there. I just don't think that there's any real science. There's no real science here involved in how a rider is set up on their bike. I've heard of instances where certain big name riders who will remain anonymous have literally just kind of plucked a handlebar out of the team truck. They've picked up a handlebar and gone, I'll fit that to the mechanic. That's it. There's no real kind of care or consideration to it. It's just like, quite like the look of that. I got a message from him in the middle of the Giro d'Italia in 2020, and he said, thanks for the work, I feel so much better on my bike. Also, handling wise, was thinking about you today in the race on some fuck's twisty descent. When you get that from a Giro d'Italia winner about the bike that you did for him. I guess when you're dealing with athletes at this sort of level, you've got to be very careful about the changes that you're making, because this is their livelihood. You can't just make rash decisions. When Teo came to see me, it wasn't a position to go and win a Grand Tour. It was just to try and help him with a few little niggles and issues that he was having. We made a few changes. I think it resulted in a different bike size, a reduction in bike size, and also a change to his pedal system, which I think paid dividends for him. There were still issues with the end result, on the grounds that, as an athlete and as a sponsored rider, he had limitations in the equipment that he was able to use. Arguably, fitting consumers is significantly easier than fitting professionals, because you have a lot more free reign with what you're able to fit them with. The main differences were that we increased this handlebar drop, we reduced the reach. The saddle height more or less stayed the same. We did improve the saddle interaction. We changed the saddle as well. There is still some saddle sticking out the back, which again is less than ideal, but that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier with it probably, in a perfect world, it probably possibly isn't the saddle I'd have put him on. But he came in, sat on the wonk. This is quite common to see in riders who run dysfunctional positions. This kind of pelvic asymmetry that I call it, rider listing off to one side. This is the kind of primary driver for knee tracking. A lot of people talk about knee tracking and putting wedging into the feet and this kind of stuff to improve knee tracking, but essentially, if a rider lists to one side, that it almost exclusively is the driver for knee tracking, for an asymmetric knee tracking.
So what's the conclusion there?
Pro cyclists have shit bike fit positions.
Pro cyclists can tolerate shit positions.
That's true. The takeaway from this video, and what it should be, is that pro cyclists are pros. They're able to tolerate massive strain. They're incredibly strong. They're flexible. They're functional. They don't sit at desks all day like the rest of us. And if you think about how pros laid out, all the weight's below the waist. They've got no arms. Referencing Lawrence Carpenter, and as a result, they got nothing to sustain. So, going back to what we were talking about earlier, in terms of the more power you put out aids in sustaining your torso angle. If you've got less upper body mass, then there's even less for you to sustain. This is the thing: pros aren't laid out in the same way as consumers are. So, therefore, we shouldn't be mimicking a professional's position. Furthermore, shouldn't be buying a pro's bike.
The summary is, if you're a pro, you should come to James for a bike fit, and he'll make your reach really short and your saddle really low, and you'll look like a little bear on a bike.
You